The autumn wind is a pirate, blustering in from sea. With a rollicking song he sweeps along, swaggering boisterously. His face is weather-beaten. He wears a hooded sash, with a silver hat about his head, and a bristling black mustache. He growls as he storms the country, a villain big and bold. And the trees all shake and quiver and quake as he robs them of their gold. The autumn wind is a raider, pillaging just for fun.
I don't shine shoes, I don't tape ankles, I don't cut checks.
Great cash, homie.
I don't shine shoes, I don't tape ankles, I don't cut checks.
Great cash, homie. Everybody want clap.
Welcome to the Week 3 edition of the Rearview Mirror podcast, the podcast where we take a look at everything from Week 2, still in our rearview mirror, break down it, analyze it, figure out why teams won, why teams lost, who overperformed, who underperformed, how we can apply some of those things to the upcoming games in Week 3. But first, on to the headlines. Story number 1, Year of the Dog update through week number 2 of the NFL. Not in the last 17 years have dogs covered the NFL and college football like they have this season. The only better season in the last 25 years was 1997. In terms of the NFL dogs, they are the 4th best start since the last 25 years. College dogs are off to the best start since the year 2000. 13 NFL dogs have won outright. We haven't seen more dogs win outright since 2002. Now, you can see the chart here. You can also take a look at my website where I have a full story on this. But here's the word of caution for you. Since I wrote this story in early August after researching it this past summer, and the prediction that this would be the year of the dog has been coming true, and I've been deemed to be correct, at least thus far early into the season, as these numbers clearly show, a lot of the mainstream media and other media sources are quoting my article, quoting stats and figures out of my article, of course not citing me as the author, not giving me any sort of credit for that, just stealing the information so that they can write their own stories and sound very smart. At any rate, that aside, we are seeing this get a lot more widespread. And what is happening, I believe, and what will continue to happen, is the public will gravitate more towards underdogs. Now, this phenomenon is going to be very interesting to follow, but at least for this past week, we saw 5 very public underdogs: the Detroit Lions, the Miami Dolphins, the Atlanta Falcons, the Jacksonville Jaguars, and the Dallas Cowboys. Of those 5 teams, 4 of them were blown out of the water. The only team that actually covered were the Dallas Cowboys. So we saw public dogs do very poorly, whereas the unpopular, ugly underdogs, including the Browns, the Rams, the Chargers, the Jets, the Chiefs, the Bears, all those teams actually covered. The only unpopular dogs, really unpopular dogs who didn't cover were the Vikings and the Oakland Raiders. So you have to be very careful moving forward about how public this story gets, how much more press it continues to get. Obviously, it's still deserving of a lot of press since we're off to such a remarkable start, best year in the last since 1997. But just be careful as you're going to bet these games and which teams you end up backing. Story number 2, teams rebounding. The past 3 years, Week 1 winners who played a Week 1 loser are now 8-15. That's 35% wins, despite being an average of 1.5 point favorite. That means they should be winning over 50% of the time, but they only win 35% of the time. Take a look at this list of some of these teams that fell into this category this past season. Think back to Week 1. How good did the Seahawks look? The 49ers look as they blew out Dallas. The Jets look as they blew out the Raiders. The Titans look as they crushed the Chiefs. The Minnesota Vikings as they crushed the Rams. And the Pittsburgh Steelers as they blew out the Cleveland Browns and then held on for a victory. All 6 of those teams lost this past weekend, and in some cases they lost pretty badly. So this is definitely a phenomenon. Store away for this upcoming, for next season, but it's something to keep in mind. Week 1 losers versus Week 1 winners. Story number 3, dome teams struggling. We definitely saw this occur this past week when we saw the Lions, the Saints, and the Falcons. Think back to Week 1. Those 3 teams, they averaged 375 passing yards per game. They threw a combined 6 touchdowns to 1 interception and had 2 sacks when they played indoors in their dome. This past week, all 3 of those teams went out on the road. All 3 of them lost. They passed for an average of 250 yards. That's 125 fewer yards per game than what they did in Week 1 in the dome. They threw 4 touchdowns and 5 interceptions, and they were sacked 8 times. That alone led me to a research project which we're going to talk about in our next section, which is a new section. We're going to throw up some graphics. Let's get on to it. In future versions of this section, we're going to go ahead and talk about early down success rate, top 5, bottom 5, movers and shakers, and that sort of thing. But I want to play off of something from the headlines that we just mentioned, and that's dome team performance, and then we'll get into a little bit of reliability. But real briefly, dome team performance. Is having a dome worth it? The answer is no. In Super Bowl history, there's only been one dome team ever who has won a Super Bowl without hosting the conference championship game. In most cases, that means having the number 1 seed. Obviously, you get that by being the number 1 team in your entire conference. When dome teams cannot get that top seed or can't host that conference championship game, they do not win the Super Bowl. So that is just a simple fact. Now, we can break down all the metrics in this chart if you can see it. If you can't see it, go to my website and check it out. I have a whole blog post discussing this in great detail. The bottom line here is that dome teams do have a slight uptick, but it's only 1% in terms of their performance against what they should be projected to do versus non-dome teams when they play at home during the regular season. So regular season at home, it's an advantage, but not a substantial advantage. It's actually more of a disadvantage when these dome teams go on the road than it is when non-dome teams go on the road. So overall, just look at the regular season as a whole. Dome teams in 16 games a year are actually at a slight disadvantage overall than our home teams. So that obviously hurts them from even making the playoffs in the first place to begin with, which is why there's 28% dome teams in the league. Only 25% of them since 2002 actually make the playoffs. So a slight decrease in terms of what you should get based on just a true percentage standpoint. When you look at terms of the playoffs themselves, obviously dome teams do very well in their dome at home when they play a playoff game. And non-dome teams still win over 58% of their home games, but they should be winning a higher rate compared to what they're favored by. Therefore, there is definitely a measurable boost for teams in a dome when they play at home in the playoffs. However, that is offset and then some by when they go on the road. When they go on the road, there's actually a 21% swing from a non-dome team on the road performing to a dome team on the road performing. That is massive, and it cannot be overcome, which is why there only has been one team in Super Bowl history to ever win the Super Bowl without hosting a conference championship game if they are a dome team. So, and you can look at the non-dome teams don't have to have that number 1 seed. You see all these upsets all the time and wildcard teams winning the Super Bowl. All these teams are teams that don't play in domes. They're teams that can play outdoors. So if you're building a stadium from scratch, I don't see why you would put your team in a dome. It just does not make any sense based on this performance that we're seeing here. Next story, I posted this on Twitter the other day, got a lot of feedback from it positively, so I wanted to do one for both road and home. This chart is very similar to what you guys have probably seen in my NFL Football Annual. If you missed that, get it from my website. It's on the purchase page. It's $14.99, well worth it. But this looks at who's the most reliable road teams, and then we're going to talk about the home teams. The most reliable road teams in terms of how they perform versus what they're projected to do based upon the line that the odds maker sets. You can see that the 49ers and the Broncos are the top 2 teams in the league since 2011 in terms of performance on the road. The aforementioned Saints, we're talking about their performance in the domes. They are the second worst team only to the Browns in terms of how poorly they perform on the road the last 3 seasons. Obviously attributable to them not being in their dome in their comfy confines and being able to run their offense. And as you scroll up this list, you can see the Vikings and the Lions and the Falcons, all teams joining them at the bottom of this list who play in domes. Then we're going to look at the home teams who are the most reliable. Well, we can see at the top, we've got a number of dome teams right at the top. When you talk about the Cardinals and the Colts, we also have the Jets and the Saints and the Vikings and the Falcons. Obviously, the Jets aren't a dome team, but the Saints, Vikings, Falcons, these are teams up in the top 10. They outperform in terms of winning games what they should do based upon what the line the odds maker sets for them. And you can definitely look at a lot of these teams have great home field advantages. When you talk about, look at the favorites who are on this list at the top of the league, who are favored by the most points, the Seahawks, the Ravens, and the Saints. These 3 teams, by and large, have the best home field edge of any team in the NFL. Look at the bottom of this list in terms of should these teams be getting 3 points when they're hosting games. At least based on the last 3 years, you can definitely see a number of teams down here. The Eagles, the Texans, the Lions, the Bucks, the Chiefs, and up to the Cowboys, the Raiders, and the Redskins. All these teams you probably suspected did not have very good home field advantages. Here it is, black and white. I know you guys probably saw that Sunday night game where the Dallas Cowboys hosted the 49ers in Week 1. It was actually the afternoon game on Sunday. That place was a sea of 49ers fans. I'm sure it's not like that for every single team that they play, but they definitely do not have a very good home field advantage in Jerry's world down in Dallas. That said, let's talk about some of these games. We're starting off with the Saints at the Browns. The Saints offense started this game off very slowly. If you look at Drew Brees' stat line, 7 of 13 for only 23 yards with a pick 6. in the first half up until 2 minutes left in that first half when he started to pick things up. The Saints offense just passed for 5.6 yards per attempt. That was 20th in the league, but they did a lot of other good things. They gained the third most first downs by rolling the ball really well in the second half. They were the fifth best in third down conversion rate, second best in yards per rush attempt at 6.4. They gained a whole total of 174 yards on the ground, and they were 5.75 in overall yards per play, seventh best. How did the Browns pull off this upset? Well, it wasn't because of their offense, which gained only 4.5 yards per play, 25th in the NFL, and only 4.9 yards per pass, 26th in the NFL. It was from those turnovers. They got 2 from these Saints. They gave the Saints nothing. They returned an interception for a touchdown. That's exactly what under-talented teams must do in order to pull off outright upsets like this. If you think about Cleveland's offense, it's no wonder they couldn't do a whole lot without Jordan Cameron, without Josh Gordon. This team was down all their deep receiving threats from last season, but yet they still were able to get the job done by frustrating Breeze just enough and by playing turnover-free football. Next up, let's talk about the Bills and the Dolphins. The Dolphins came off that big upset win over the New England Patriots, but the Bills were off of an upset win as well. But when you look at this game, the biggest number that jumps out to me was Ryan Tannehill. He threw 49 pass attempts and had a total of 210 yards. That is 4.3 yards per pass, dead last in the NFL. So the Bills defense frustrated Ryan Tannehill, and they passed the ball a ton. They only ran the ball 21 times and gained 80 yards. That was 3.8 yards per carry. So you look back and say, okay, well, perhaps the Bills gained a lot of yards on the ground. Actually, no. They were actually worse than the Dolphins at only 3.4 yards per rushing attempt. But the pass plays that they did have were completed for big yards. They only made 16 completions, but they were for 7.8 yards per attempt. That was fourth best in the league of any team, which was important because they had the third worst number of first downs, the second worst early down success rate, were pretty much terrible in every other aspect of the game. But once again, they had a 2-0 lead on the turnovers. They had a non-offensive touchdown from a kick return touchdown, and that was the big difference in this game. But this game, unlike the Browns and Saints, was not even close. That Dolphins offense could not do anything, particularly in the air. Dallas at Tennessee was just total domination. It started with how effective these offenses were, and it boils down to how well Dallas Cowboys could run the ball. They actually ran the ball 43 times from a Jason Garrett offense for 220 yards at 5.1 yards per carry. That led to the second biggest gap in time of possession this entire week. The Cowboys had it for 41 minutes. Tennessee had it for just 18. Dallas had twice as many first downs, third most in the league. The Titans had the third fewest in the league. When you look at early down success rate, Titans were 28th in the league offensively, and they were dead last when they did get to third down, converting just 20% of those into first downs. This team only got into Dallas's red zone one time, did not score a touchdown. They threw 2 interceptions. Quarterback was very poor. Jake Locker in this game had a 60 passer rating, which was the 28th rated of any quarterback in the league. They also had a 28 completion percentage, which again was 28th in the league. When you look at Tony Romo, he didn't do anything tremendous in the passing game, actually 25th in yards per pass attempt, but he did not throw a single interception, and this really was a just complete total domination. Very interesting to see the Cowboys run the ball like this on the Tennessee Titans run defense, which was supposed to be very stout after their Week 1 game against Kansas City. Moving on to the Patriots at the Vikings, this was a game that basically showed how important a strong running game can be, particularly to a quarterback who might not be upper echelon. And in this case, all the pressure fell onto Matt Castle, and he had the worst passer rating of any quarterback in the league. Go ahead and throw out the fact that he threw 4 interceptions. Let's just look at what he did otherwise. 53% completions, that was 29th in the league. 4.5 yards per pass, that was 30th in the league. Factor in those with his interceptions, he had the league's worst passer rating at a whopping 28 in terms of passer rating. The yards per rush, they could not run the ball without Adrian Peterson, 2.8. That was 28th in the league. So their yards per play was second worst in the league. The Patriots, interestingly, not really great in terms of yards per play. They were just 22nd in the league. But Tom Brady played very well, 101 passer rating, 68% completions. That was 7th best in the league. They sacked Matt Castle 6 times, which is obviously massive. You combine 4 interceptions with 6 sacks. Good night this game. The rest of these stats really don't even make a whole lot of difference at all. But I will say the Patriots' early down success rate was 4th worst in the league. So they've struggled the last 2 weeks now in having explosive plays and skipping third downs, something to keep our eye on. Falcons at the Bengals, I was very impressed with quarterback Andy Dalton. This was a game where the Bengals were without Marvin Jones, were without Tyler Eifert. They lost A.J. Green in this game, and yet Andy Dalton had 12.6 yards per attempt. That was the most in the NFL. A 124 passer rating, that was 3rd best in the NFL. Helped lead his team to having a 6.84 yards per play, which was 3rd best in the NFL, because the ground game only generated 3.8 yards per rush. But it was largely because of Andy Dalton that this team was able to control the pace of this game and get up on the scoreboard. With the Atlanta Falcons, this team could not produce like it did against that Saints defense at home. This Bengals defense frustrated Matt Ryan. He threw for a 47 passer rating. That was 2nd worst in the NFL, and just 4.8 yards per attempt. That was 29th in the NFL. 3 interceptions. Obviously, that's a terrible number. You're not going to win games on the road as an underdog throwing 3 interceptions, and they got no takeaways from the Cincinnati Bengals. Neither of these teams were particularly good in terms of gaining first downs or converting on third downs. That's why there were 10 total punts in this game. But it was a very slow game overall, lower scoring, but one that was clearly dominated by Cincinnati Bengals from start to finish. Next up, the Jets visited the Packers, and this was a game where I think many people thought after the Packers allowed a ton of rushing yards to the Seattle Seahawks in Week 1, with the Jets gaining a ton of rushing yards against the Oakland Raiders last week, that this was going to be a game where the Jets were going to be able to run the ball on the Packers. That did not end up being the case. In fact, the Jets just ran for 3.9 yards per rush, and the Packers, even without B.J. Raji, tried to force Geno Smith to beat them, and he could not do that. He was 16 of 32, which is 50%, obviously, third worst completion percentage, 63 passer rating, which was 26th in the league. He threw one interception, and the biggest problem for the Jets in this game was early down success rate. They were third worst in that category, and they allowed Aaron Rodgers to have a 106 passer rating, which was 8th best in the league, and throw for 7 yards per attempt, again, 8th best in the league, 5.7 yards per play, 8th best in the league, and 25 first downs, which was 6th best in the league. So in this game, in this situation, the Jets, although they got up early, they hung on for a half-point cover with the hook, but this team did not look very good, even though they were ahead on the scoreboard for a large point in time. Perhaps one of my most favorite games this weekend was that Chargers and Seahawks game. This game was so interesting from a number of perspectives, but from a statistical perspective, they don't get much more interesting than this. Check out some of these statistics that favored the Seattle Seahawks in this game. The Seahawks actually ran for 8.3 yards per carry on just 13 rushes. That's 108 yards. They passed for 7.2 yards per attempt and 180 yards on just 17 completions. That totals up to 7.2 yards per play, which is the best in the NFL this past weekend, and certainly much more than what the Chargers did of 5 yards per play, which is 18th. And the Chargers also only ran it for 2.7 yards per rush. That was 29th, and they actually rushed it 37 times, gaining just 2.7 yards per attempt. So how in the world did they win this game? Well, they won it by a number of things. Number one was their third down conversions. They were 59% on third down. That was the third best in the league. They also were the third most first down conversions at 26, and they held the Seahawks to just 14 total first down conversions. They in total controlled the ball for 42 minutes versus the Seahawks 17 minutes. That was the biggest gap of any team in the NFL. When you look at scoring opportunities, they attempted 3 field goals and made all 3. The Seahawks did not even get the chance to make a single field goal, as well as the Seahawks went 2 of 2 in the red zone, whereas the Chargers got down there 4 times and converted 3 of those. This was a game that was just dominated from the Chargers, yet the Seahawks offensively, from some of the statistics, whether it's yards per rush, yards per pass, yards per play, were tremendous. They just did not have enough plays to total enough yards to get enough trips into the red zone to compete with the Chargers. When the Chargers hold the ball that long, there's not much a defense can do. Even the Seattle Seahawks defense, they did not stand up to the test in that heat in San Diego, and they basically wilted. It'll be very fascinating to see how this team steps it up against the Broncos. Broncos at the Chiefs is a game where you look at Peyton Manning's stat line, you see 81% completions, best in the NFL, 9.1 yards per pass, second best in the NFL, 143 passer rating, best in the NFL, no turnovers, no interceptions, 3 passing touchdowns. You think, how did they not beat the Chiefs much worse than they did? The answer is simple. Ball control by the Chiefs, specifically third down conversions. You thought that the Broncos defense was going to be a lot better this year. In fact, the Chiefs converted 69% of their third down attempts. That was the best in the NFL. That gave them 28 first downs, which was second best in the NFL. For the Broncos, they were tremendous at staying out of third downs. They had the second best early down success rate offensively, but they could not convert third downs. They were down at 38%. That was 21st in the league. Those factors combined allowed the Chiefs to have the 5th largest edge in time of possession at 36 minutes compared to the Broncos' 23.8 minutes. And that's what allowed the Broncos, prevented them from pulling away too far, especially in the second half of this game, what allowed the Chiefs to stay close. And if the Broncos' defense was playing a little bit better, obviously you could see the numbers that this offense was capable of putting up against the Chiefs' defense. That would have continued. So much like last season, the best way to beat this Broncos team is to control the ball, control possession, convert third downs, keep Peyton Manning off the field. And that's pretty much what the Chiefs tried to do. They just spotted the Broncos too large of a lead to begin with, and they themselves could not be efficient enough. They went just 2 of 4 in the red zone. The Broncos went 3 of 4. The Chiefs went 2 of 4 in goal-to-go situations, and they also missed a field goal. That's pretty much the difference in this game. It was a 7-point game, and if they had converted one more of those red zone opportunities, 3 of 4 just like the Broncos did, this game would have been tied headed into overtime. Rams at Bucks. This is a very interesting game. The Bucks started out the season, everybody's talking about one of the biggest improvements was going to be their defense. Lovie Smith coming in there. Problem is they've lost 5 of their 11 defensive starters since week 1. It's only 2 weeks. 5 of their starters are down. And this game, that helped aid Austin Davis to basically put up an identical stat line to that of the free agent acquisition, Josh McCown. They both passed for 76% completion. They both passed for over 7.6 yards per attempt. All those numbers are top 5 of all quarterbacks this week in each category. The difference being the Rams quarterback did not throw an interception. Josh McCown did. So the Rams quarterback actually edged him out by 17 points on passer rating and had 97. Otherwise, this was a tale of failed red zone conversions. The Bucks went 2 of 5 in the red zone. The Rams went 1 of 3, and this was a very close game throughout. The largest lead for the Bucks was 7. The largest lead for the Rams was 3. The Rams ended up winning this game by 2 points. Not a game you're going to want to watch for a second time, that's for sure. But certainly this talks a lot to what is going on in Tampa with that defense, what is going on with that quarterback, and most importantly, how great did Austin Davis play in a very tough situation on the road. Next game we're going to jump to is the nightcap game, the Bears at the 49ers as they open their stadium. Really a total tale of two halves. If you look at this game from the Bears' perspective, they played terribly in the first half. In the first half, in the game they had 6 punts, and the 49ers punted it just once. In the game, the Bears had just 4.1 yards per play, which was 29th in the NFL, and they ran for just 2.7 yards per attempt, which is 30th in the NFL. They passed for only 5 yards per attempt, which is 26th in the NFL. So you're looking at a quarterback in Jay Cutler who did not have any running game, whose best receivers were out, but yet he still managed to deliver a 119 passer rating, which is 5th best in the NFL, mainly because of the 4 passing touchdowns that he had. But lots of credit goes to him. In the past, a lot of times you would see him check out of this game mentally. He stayed in this game, stayed focused all the way through to the end. The big difference here, obviously, were the turnovers, 3 interceptions, 1 fumble lost. Colin Kaepernick just played terribly with a 30th ranked passer rating in this one. And really, the fact of the matter is, the 49ers controlled time of possession. There were a ton of penalties on both teams, 26 combined. Bears had 10. 49ers had 16 called against them. But this was just a tale of two halves, and the turnovers made the difference, allowed the Bears to do something that we have not seen in ages. In fact, the 49ers had never in franchise history lost a home game in prime time with an 11 or more point lead entering the fourth quarter. They were up by 13 points entering the fourth quarter, and the NFL was 254-2 the last 25 years when you're a home favorite in prime time with an 11-plus point lead entering the fourth quarter. It was 121-0 the last 10 years, and the 49ers, in large part due to Colin Kaepernick's interception, but also don't overlook that the Jay Cutler-led Bears were able to capitalize on those, were able to come back and win this game outright by 8 points. The only thing I'm going to say about this Raiders-Texans game is the game was decided by these turnovers, and because the Raiders' defense could not do much of anything to stop the Houston Texans from passing the ball extremely well. Fitzpatrick had the second-best passer rating of any quarterback in the league. But there's a lot more interesting things that lie below the surface here. The first one is the Texans defense gave up the number 1 early down success rate offense to the Raiders this week. They did the same thing to the Washington Redskins last week. So this Texans defense has more problems that are being brought to the surface. We obviously know that the Raiders, they struggled. They could not convert third downs to save their lives. They were 31st in the league in that metric. The Texans were very terrible at converting early down success rate. They were 27th in the league in that metric. The difference here was when they did get forced into those third downs, which was often, they converted 60% of them. And like I said, Ryan Fitzpatrick had a good game. So this Raiders defense is not very good, but the Texans offense is struggling to pick up big chunk plays, and the Texans defense is also struggling to keep teams and force them into third downs. When they do get them there, they did pretty well against them. So that's all we're going to say about this game. Let's switch over to the final game that I'm going to cover in this podcast, and that's the Jaguars and the Redskins. If people were taking the Jaguars, it likely was because they didn't really think highly of RG3 and this Washington Redskins offense. Unfortunately for them, RG3 went out for an injury, and fortunately for the Washington Redskins, that happened. Jay Gruden is definitely happy about this, I think, because he didn't have to make that decision as a first-year head coach to bench the franchise quarterback who was not playing well, to start the guy who's actually the much better fit for his offense. And Kirk Cousins showed that when he came out there. I love the fact that Jay Gruden let this team run up a 31-point lead. They led by 14 points at halftime, but he still let them over double that to kind of get Kirk Cousins worked into this offense and give this offense a lot of confidence. They had 10 sacks on the Jaguars defense, on the Jaguars quarterback, and this Jaguars team, miserable offensively, okay defensively. I mean, you were hoping if you're taking the Jags that defensively they would be able to hang in enough for the offense to do something. They were dead last in almost every single valuable category, whether it's total first downs, early down success rate, yards per rushing attempt at 2.5, yards per play at just over 3. It was a terrible, terrible offensive performance, and this Redskins offense, I think, is going to be in much better shape with that quarterback. It's going to be very interesting to see how this team moves going forward, because they already do have a pretty productive run game, and you factor in a quarterback who's actually efficient to run Jay Gruden's offense. It's going to be quite interesting. Let's break down some of the injuries that we saw happen this past weekend in the NFL. First of all, Charles Tillman is out for the season for the Bears with the torn triceps, and Jay Ratliff and Chris Conte, 2 other players defensively, are having issues with concussion, one with a shoulder injury. So that defense obviously was looking pretty radical, though it wasn't preventing Colin Kaepernick from throwing interceptions, but they are losing pieces by the moment. Cincinnati Bengals, A.J. Green, he's messed up with his toe, not sure when he's going to be back. Vontaze Burfict hurt his neck, and guard Kevin Zeitler out with a calf injury perhaps. They're still not sure what's going on in Cleveland with Jordan Cameron in terms of how long he's going to be out. He's listed as week to week. The Green Bay Packers, looks like they might have lost Micah Hyde for some time with a knee injury. All these are obviously very early. We're not sure exactly how long some of these players are going to be out for. Arthur Jones for the Colts, he got hurt in a game on Monday night. The Jacksonville Jaguars, as bad as that offense is, have 3 players with injuries. Cecil Short and Alan Hearns, both of those guys messed up with one hamstring, one ankle. They're listed as day-to-day. Mercedes Lewis, however, is out. He's messed up his ankle out 6 to 8 weeks. With the Chiefs, Jamal Charles, he got injured in that game with an ankle injury, potentially a high ankle sprain. They're not sure exactly how much time he's going to miss. Eric Berry hurt his ankle as well. Obviously in Miami, big loss was Noshawn Moreno. He's going to be out 4 to 8 weeks with elbow injury. The Saints also lost their starting running back, Mark Ingram. He's out with a hand injury. He might be back by week 7. We'll have to see how that goes. The Giants lost the DB, Walter Thurmond. He messed up his pec. He's out for the entire season. The Jets are dealing with Eric Decker. He came out for a while in the game last week with a hamstring injury. They're not sure exactly how severe that is right now. Ryan Matthews messed up his knee. I think it's an MCL sprain. He's out 4 to 5 weeks at this point in time. Tavon Austin, similar injury but supposedly less severe, might miss 2 weeks for the Rams. 49ers lost Vernon Davis. He's out with an ankle injury. He's on crutches at the end of the game. They're not sure exactly how long he's going to be out for. His backup, the backup tight end there, also messed up, so that's why his name is Carrier. Got a lot of touches. He's a third-string tight end up in San Francisco. The Bucs, again, I mentioned this earlier in the podcast, defensive players dropping like flies. Gerald McCoy, he broke his hand. I think he might be able to play with cast on, but we'll have to see. And Mason Foster, he hurt his shoulder. The Tennessee Titans, they lost to DB Jason McCourty, messed up his groin. They're not sure if he's going to miss time, how long that might be. And obviously the biggest injury to a starting quarterback this season, we have Robert Griffin III for the Redskins. He's out indefinitely with a dislocated ankle. And Deshaun Jackson, he is out potentially as well. Listed as day-to-day with a shoulder injury. Supposedly no structural damage today. We'll have to see how long he's out for. But that's the injury wrap for Week 2. That wraps up the Week 3 edition of the Rearview Mirror podcast, looking back at the Week 2. Looking forward to Week 3. We've got a great slate of games, I think, lined up this week. A lot of premier matchups. There's very few divisional games, but there are a couple that are of interest. The Cardinals and the 49ers play in Arizona. Arizona is a short underdog there. And another game that should be interesting is the Eagles versus the Redskins. The Redskins might have some new life with Kirk Cousins. The Eagles were just handed that game more or less with some penalty help from the referees on Monday night. So that should be another very intriguing game with some teams that certainly have some high aspirations, both off of wins. When you look at the rest of the slate, there are some teams at home who are not really expected to win. When you look at the Rams hosting the Cowboys, the Jaguars hosting the Colts, the Giants hosting the Texans, the Browns hosting the Ravens, and the aforementioned Cardinals hosting the 49ers. All of those teams at this point in time are pick-em or worse at home. And actually, I think you have 7 out of the 16 games on the card are actually lined 3 or less currently. And there are only 2 games that are lined above a touchdown, actually, or even a touchdown or higher. You have the Minnesota Vikings traveling to the Saints. The Saints are a 9.5-point favorite right now. And then, of course, you have the Oakland Raiders traveling to the East Coast at a 1 p.m. kickoff to take on Tom Brady and the New England Patriots. They are currently a 14.5-point favorite, are the Patriots. Of course, the late games, you have 3 of them. One's a divisional game, San Francisco at Arizona. You also have the Super Bowl rematch, Denver at Seattle. Seattle off of a loss trying to get right at home. Currently, they are favored by 5 points, are the Seahawks. Very similar line to what we saw when Green Bay went into Seattle Week 1. Sunday night game, the surprising Carolina Panthers hosting the Pittsburgh Steelers. That should be a very interesting matchup. Obviously, the Panthers, I think, exceeding the expectations of myself and a large number of other sharp guys out there who were betting them under their season win total. They currently have 2 wins and are looking very strong, regardless of how good that offensive line is. The Monday night's game might not be so exciting. Chicago Bears at the New York Jets. Right now, the Jets are favored by 2 points. So there's a ton of 1 o'clock games this week. I'm not sure why I liked it last week, the way that they had a lot of 4 p.m. games Eastern time in that mix. We only have 3 of those this week. And don't forget, a bunch of teams go on bye next week, or at least several of them, starting in Week 4. So there are a few teams who are playing their last game before their bye. All right, we will catch you guys next week on the Rearview Mirror.
This is gonna be a fun ride. This is gonna be a fun ride.
Everybody want clap.
I'm gonna play when I wanna play, do what I wanna do. I'm gonna say what I wanna say. Did I say anything stupid today? My role is to take the ball deep, take the top off the defense. To take the ball deep, take the top off the defense.
If I can't get to it, nobody can get to it.
I don't shine shoes, I don't tape ankles, I don't cut checks.
Great cash, homie.
I don't shine shoes, I don't tape ankles, I don't cut checks.
Great cash, homie. Everybody want clap. One clap. One clap. One clap.